Why was she standing there alone, watching men who didn't even know she existed? The observation deck was cold, sterile, the kind of place where sound goes to die. But down below in that massive pool, the noise was deafening. Shouts, splashes, the echo of bodies hitting water with the force of controlled violence. This was the Naval Special Warfare Advanced Training Command, where ordinary men came to become something more. And she was watching them, recording them, taking notes on a ruggedized data pad with the same quiet efficiency a librarian might catalog books. Chief Warrant Officer 5 Anna Sharma. 5 silver bars separated by 4 black blocks on her collar. To anyone who bothered to look, that rank should have meant something, should have commanded respect. But no one was looking. Not really. They saw the khaki instructor's uniform, devoid of unit patches or identifying marks. They saw a woman standing still while they moved. They saw quiet. And in their world, quiet meant weak, invisible, irrelevant. The air in the natatorium clung to everything. Chlorine so thick you could taste it at the back of your throat. Damp concrete that made your skin feel perpetually wet. It was a space designed to break men down, to test their limits in controlled drowning scenarios, to push them until panic set in and they either conquered it or quit. But she wasn't here to be tested. She was here to observe, to evaluate, to record data that would later inform decisions made in rooms far removed from this echoing chamber of ambition and suffering. Down on the pool deck, a group of SEAL candidates hauled themselves out of the water. Lieutenant Junior Grade Marcus Thorne shook his head like a wet dog, spraying droplets in an arc that caught the fluorescent lights. He was built like a recruitment poster come to life. Broad shoulders that stretched his wetsuit, a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. And confidence. God, the confidence. It radiated off him like heat off asphalt in summer. Behind him came Petty Officer First Class Rowlands, a block of muscle with a shaved head and hands that looked like they could crush concrete. And Petty Officer Second Class Jensen, wiry and thin, with eyes that darted around like he was always looking for the next joke, the next angle. They were laughing at something. Some shared experience that bonded them in the way that only shared suffering can. Thorne's eyes drifted up to the observation deck. To her, she could feel his gaze even from that distance. Could feel the dismissal in it. He nudged Rowlands with his elbow, said something. Both men looked up at her now, grinning. She didn't react, didn't look away, didn't acknowledge that she'd noticed. She simply continued making notes, her fingers moving across the data pad with the kind of precision that suggested she'd done this 1,000 times before, because she had. What were they thinking looking at her? What box were they putting her in? She knew. She'd seen it before. Pencil pusher, bureaucrat. Some analyst from Naval Sea Systems Command sent to evaluate equipment, not people. Someone who lived in spreadsheets and procurement forms, not in the water, not in the field. An obstacle dressed in khaki. A speed bump on their path to glory. They had no idea, and that was fine. She didn't need them to know. Didn't need recognition or respect from men who measured worth in physical dominance and bravado. She had a job to do, data to collect, observations to document. The mission didn't require their approval, but there was something else happening here, something beneath the surface of their glances and grins. It was a test. Not the official kind, not the evolutions that were scheduled and graded and recorded in their training jackets. This was the other kind. The unspoken hierarchy that existed in every military unit, the invisible ladder where trigger pullers sat at the top and everyone else existed somewhere below. And in their minds she was below, far below, a woman, quiet, still, therefore weak, therefore fair game. The final evolution of the day was approaching, a simulated flooded compartment egress. The lights would be cut, plunging the natatorium into near darkness. Wave generators would churn the pool into chaos, and teams would have to navigate a submerged obstacle course, find the exit points, and surface without panicking. It was designed to replicate the terror of a sinking ship, the disorientation of cold water filling your lungs while you scramble for survival. She needed to observe the entry point. Needed to see how they managed the transition from light to dark, from calm to chaos. So she descended from the observation deck, her boots making soft sounds on the metal stairs, and walked onto the pool deck. The smell was stronger here. Chlorine mixed with sweat and rubber and something else. Fear, maybe, or determination. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. She stood near the edge of the pool, close enough to see the churning water, the way it caught the overhead lights and fractured them into 1,000 moving shards. Her data pad was held loosely in one hand, her attention focused, complete. She didn't notice Thorne and his team finishing their run. Didn't see them gathering, waiting for the next group to cycle through. Didn't sense them moving closer until it was too late to avoid the confrontation. Or maybe she did. Maybe she knew exactly what was coming and simply chose not to run. They formed a semicircle around her, casual, predatory, cutting off her path back to the main walkway with their bodies, 3 large men and 1 woman who hadn't asked for their attention. Thorne spoke first, his voice dripping with false friendliness, the kind of tone that sounds polite but carries an edge underneath. "Chief, appreciate you keeping such a close eye on us. Anything we can do to help you with your report?" She looked up from her data pad. Her eyes met his, deep brown, steady. Giving nothing away. No fear, no irritation, no invitation to continue, just observation. "Your team's oxygen consumption rate was 12% above baseline for this exercise, Lieutenant. I've noted it." Her voice was low, even without inflection, like she was reading a weather report. Thorne's smile tight. He'd expected something different, a flustered response maybe, nervousness, some sign that his presence, his proximity, his physical dominance affected her. Instead, she'd given him data. Clinical, detached. It pricked his pride in a way he didn't fully understand. 12%. See, Gator, that's what happens when you're a finely tuned athletic machine. We work harder. He took another step closer, invading her personal space in a way that was deliberate, calculated to make her uncomfortable. "Maybe you should join us for a lap, Chief. Cool off. We can show you how to manage your breathing." Before she could respond, before she could step back or deflect or leave, Roland stumbled, or appeared to stumble. His heavy forearm connected with her shoulder. A solid, deliberate blow designed to knock her off balance, to send her stumbling backward into the pool where she'd be humiliated, soaked, stripped of whatever dignity she thought she had. That was the plan. Simple. Effective. The kind of hazing that happened in every training command, the unspoken test that separated the insiders from the outsiders. But she didn't stumble. She absorbed the impact. Her body shifted with it in a subtle pivot that was almost too fast to see, her center of gravity remaining perfectly stable. She simply took 1 step back, her expression unchanged. Like being shoved by a 200-pound man was no more significant than a breeze. Thorne's patience evaporated. This quiet woman's refusal to be intimidated, to play her assigned role in their little performance, was an affront, an insult. She was supposed to react, supposed to show fear or anger or something, but there was nothing, just that steady gaze and that infuriating calm. "You know what?" he said, his voice dropping the pretense of friendliness. "Jensen's right, you need to get wet." He reached for her, his intent clear, to grab her arm and haul her into the water. A classic bit of hazing that would put the desk jockey in her place, remind her that in this world physical strength was currency and she had none. That's what he thought. That's what they all thought. His hand never landed. What happened next took 3 seconds, maybe less, but those 3 seconds changed everything. As Thorne's fingers closed in, reaching for her arm, Sharma moved. It wasn't a strike, wasn't a block in any conventional sense. Her left hand came up, not to parry his but to meet it, her fingers gently guiding his wrist. Simultaneously, she pivoted on the ball of her right foot, using his own forward momentum to turn him. It wasn't a throw. It was a redirection. Physics, not force. Thorne found himself suddenly spinning past her, his lunge carrying him off the edge of the pool. He hit the water with a surprised shout and a heavy splash that sent waves rippling across the surface. Rollins and Jensen froze for a microsecond, shocked. Then anger flashed in Rollins' eyes, hot and immediate. He lunged. A crude, powerful grab aimed at her torso, designed to overwhelm through sheer mass. But Sharma took a single short step inside his reach. Her right hand slid up his arm, her thumb finding the pressure point on his brachial nerve with the precision of a surgeon. His arm went numb instantly, his grip failing before it could even form. At the same time, her left hand pressed firmly into his sternum. Not a strike, but a solid, unyielding frame. With another small pivot of her hips, she used his own mass against him. He staggered backward, his balance completely broken, and toppled into the pool beside his officer. Jensen, seeing his two larger companions neutralized in under 3 seconds, hesitated. He looked at Sharma, who now stood perfectly still, her hands back at her sides. Her face was a placid mask. She hadn't broken a sweat. There was no anger, no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet, waiting calm. The entire exchange had been silent on her part, executed with the fluid efficiency of a machine that had performed these movements so many times they were no longer conscious thought. They were reflex, instinct, muscle memory carved into her body through years of repetition in places far darker and more dangerous than this sterile training facility. The only sounds had been the splashes and Thorne's indignant sputtering as he surfaced, confusion and rage warring on his face. From across the pool, a voice bellowed, deep, authoritative. "What in the hell is going on over there, Master Chief Tors, barrel-chested, career SEAL?" A man who'd seen combat on 4 continents and had the scars and stories to prove it. He was moving toward them now, his boots pounding on the wet concrete. Sharma didn't answer, didn't explain, didn't defend herself or her actions. She simply turned, her gaze sweeping over the scene with the same analytical detachment she'd shown while taking notes. She registered the other candidates watching, their eyes wide, their mouths open, the instructors moving toward her. The sputtering figures of Thorne and Rollins in the water, Jensen standing frozen like he'd just witnessed something he couldn't quite process. Her eyes flickered down to the small, dark lens embedded in the chest strap of her gear. Still active, still recording. She took a steadying breath, turned her back on the scene, and walked away without a word. She didn't run, didn't shout, didn't offer explanations or justifications. She simply withdrew, leaving a wake of stunned silence and confusion behind her. It was a statement without words, a lesson delivered in the language of action rather than rhetoric. And as she disappeared through the steel door that led to the administrative section of the building, one question hung in the air like chlorine vapor. Who was she really? Back in the sterile quiet of her temporary quarters, Anna Sharma placed her data pad on the small desk. The room was generic, impersonal. A bed with tight military corners, a small desk, a wall locker, the kind of space that thousands of service members had occupied before her and thousands more would occupy after. She stripped off her damp outer layer with methodical movements. No rush, no agitation, just the same economical efficiency she applied to everything. She connected a small shielded cable to the camera embedded in her chest rig and initiated a data transfer. The file was small, efficiently compressed, but the high-resolution video and audio were perfectly clear. She watched it once, her face impassive as the scene played out on her laptop screen. The casual mockery, the false friendliness masking aggression, the physical intimidation, the assault. It was all there, documented with unshakable clarity, time stamps, GPS coordinates. Video evidence that couldn't be disputed or explained away. She opened a new file. A standard incident report form that existed in every military database. In precise block letters, she filled in the required fields. Time, 1642 Zulu. Location, Naval Special Warfare Advanced Training Command, Natatorium Facility 3. Personnel involved. Nature of incident, she didn't editorialize. Didn't add emotional color or personal interpretation. She simply stated facts. What happened, what she observed, what she did in response. The report was clinical, detached, perfect. But here's what she didn't write in that report. What she couldn't write. The exhaustion that came from being constantly tested, constantly questioned, constantly required to prove her worth in ways her male counterparts never were. The weariness of walking into spaces where she was automatically assumed to be less capable, less experienced, less worthy of respect. The particular kind of anger that came from being physically assaulted by men who thought her gender made her fair game. She'd felt it before. In other training facilities, other operational environments, other moments where men decided that her presence was an invitation to demonstrate their dominance. And every time she'd chosen the same response. Not escalation, not matching their aggression with her own, but documentation, professionalism, letting the system work the way it was designed to work, trusting that institutions, when presented with irrefutable evidence, would choose justice over protection of the old guard. It was a kind of faith, a belief that despite all the flaws and biases and structural inequalities that existed in military culture, the core principles still mattered: accountability, standards, the idea that everyone, regardless of rank or reputation, was subject to the same rules. But faith required patience, and patience in moments like this was its own form of courage. She attached the video file to her report, added her digital signature, and sent it through encrypted channels to 3 different offices: the Command Legal Officer, the Inspector General's Office for Naval Special Warfare, and a third address that wasn't listed in any official directory. That third address was important, because Anna Sharma wasn't just a chief warrant officer. She wasn't just an instructor or an observer or a technician. She was something else entirely. Something that operated in the shadows between official military operations and classified actions that never made the news. Morning came cold and gray, the kind of dawn that felt more like an ending than a beginning. In his office, Captain Raymond Evans, commanding officer of the Naval Special Warfare Advanced Training Command, stared at his computer screen with the expression of a man watching his career implode in real time. The email had arrived at 500, flagged priority, encrypted at a level he rarely saw. He'd needed 2 different authentication protocols just to open it. And what he found inside made his stomach sink: an incident report, video evidence, and a CC line that included names he recognized from briefings about national-level special operations, the kind of operations that had congressional oversight and funding that came from black budgets. He'd opened the video file, watched it twice, the first time with disbelief, the second time with growing horror, because he understood now, understood what had really happened on his pool deck. 3 of his candidates, including an officer he'd personally recommended for advanced training, had physically assaulted a senior warrant officer. That alone was enough to end careers. But there was more. Things he was beginning to piece together from the fragments of classified information he had access to. Anna Sharma wasn't just any warrant officer. She wasn't here to evaluate dive computers or training protocols or equipment performance. She was here for something else. Something he didn't have clearance to fully understand, but could infer from the breadcrumbs left in her service record. What he could see, even through the heavy redactions, was enough to make his mouth go dry. 20 years of active service, multiple deployments to hostile fire zones, expert qualifications in signals intelligence, cryptology, offensive electronic warfare, master-level certifications in military freefall combat diving, advanced close-quarters combat, and decorations that read like a greatest hits compilation of valor: Navy Cross, Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor devices, a Purple Heart, each award earned for actions he couldn't read about because the after-action reports were classified above his level. This was a Tier 1 operator, a living legend whose entire career had been spent in shadows so deep that most people in the military didn't even know her unit existed. And 3 of his trainees, boys playing at being warriors, had decided she was weak, had decided that her quiet professionalism was an invitation to prove their dominance, had put their hands on her like she was some junior enlisted they could bully with impunity. The rage he felt wasn't just professional, it was personal, an insult to everything he'd spent his career building. Evans picked up his phone, made 3 calls, the first to his legal officer, the second to his command master chief, the third to a number that connected him to a voice he didn't recognize but which carried an authority that made his spine straighten reflexively. The conversation was brief, pointed. And when it ended, Evans understood exactly what was expected of him. Handle this, swiftly, decisively. Ensure the integrity of the training environment and the standards of conduct are unequivocally upheld. Report the final disposition directly to this office. No further communication will follow. The message was clear. Sharma wasn't just a protected asset. She was a test of his leadership, of his command's culture, of whether the values they claimed to uphold actually meant something when tested against the tribal loyalties and unspoken hierarchies that existed in special operations culture. By now, word had spread through the command, not the full story, but fragments, rumors, the kind of whispered speculation that fills the void when official information is scarce. Some candidates claimed Sharma had attacked Thorne unprovoked. Others said Thorne had slipped. Still others insisted she'd used some kind of secret technique, some classified martial art that regular people weren't allowed to learn. The truth was simpler and more complicated than any of them guessed. She'd simply been more skilled, more trained, more experienced. She'd operated at a level they couldn't comprehend because they'd never been required to. They were still learning the basics of how to survive in the water. She'd been surviving in places where survival was a daily negotiation with death. Master Chief Torres knew something was wrong the moment he saw Captain Evans's face. They'd served together for 8 years, had deployed together twice. Torres knew every expression his co wore, every tell that signaled stress or anger or disappointment. This was all three. Evans handed him the incident report without a word. Torres read it standing up, his jaw tightening with each sentence. When he finished, he set it down carefully like it was an explosive device that might detonate if handled roughly. "Sir, Torres started, but Evans held up a hand. "How long has this culture existed in your pool?" Evans asked, his voice quiet but carrying an edge that could cut steel. "How long have we tolerated the idea that anyone, especially women who don't fit a certain image, are fair game for harassment?" Torres had no answer. Or rather, he had an answer he didn't want to speak aloud. Too long, since before he'd arrived, since the beginning probably, it was part of the culture, the unspoken test, the hazing that separated insiders from outsiders. Everyone knew it happened. Everyone looked the other way because boys will be boys and this was a tough business. And if you couldn't handle a little rough treatment, how were you going to handle combat? Except it wasn't a little rough treatment. It was assault. And the woman they'd assaulted could have killed them with the same efficiency she'd used to put them in the water. She'd chosen restraint, chosen to trust the system. And now the system had to prove that trust was justified. Evans scheduled a formal captain's mast for the following day. Not in the privacy of his office, as was common for minor infractions, but in the main briefing auditorium. He ordered attendance of every instructor and trainee not actively engaged in an evolution. This wasn't going to be quiet, wasn't going to be handled behind closed doors where it could be minimized or forgotten. This was going to be a lesson, etched into the institutional memory of his command with the force of a branding iron. That night in the barracks, Thorne sat on his bunk surrounded by his fire team. They were trying to piece together what had happened, trying to understand how a quiet warrant officer had put them in the water without breaking a sweat. "She got lucky," Roland said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Lucky my ass," Jensen muttered. "You saw how fast she moved. That wasn't luck, that was training." "So what?" Thorne snapped. "She's some kind of ninja, come on, she's a technician. Probably took a couple self-defense classes and got confident." But even as he said it, he knew it was wrong, knew that what he'd experienced wasn't self-defense. It was something else, something refined and practiced and utterly ruthless in its efficiency. Still, admitting that meant admitting he'd been wrong, meant acknowledging that his assumptions about strength and gender and worth were fundamentally flawed. And that was a bridge too far, so he clung to his narrative. Lucky shot, fluke, nothing more. The auditorium was silent the next morning when Lieutenant Thorne, Petty Officer Rowlands, and Petty Officer Jensen stood at attention before the stage. Captain Evans sat at a simple table. Master Chief Torres stood to his right, and to his left, relaxed and still, stood Chief Warrant Officer Anna Sharma. She didn't look at the accused, didn't acknowledge them in any way. Her gaze was fixed on the large projection screen behind them, her hands clasped behind her back in a parade rest that somehow managed to project more authority than the rigid attention of the three men below her. The room was packed, every seat filled, every eye forward, waiting. An administrative officer read Sharma's report aloud, his voice flat and procedural. The words, clinical and detached, painted a picture that was damning in its simplicity. Time, location, actions taken, response employed. No embellishment, no drama, just facts. When he finished, Captain Evans gave a quiet nod. Play the video. The footage filled the screen, 60 seconds of high-definition evidence. They heard Thorne's taunts, the false friendliness dripping with contempt, saw Rowlands's deliberate shove, witnessed the calm, minimalist defense, watched the arrogance on the SEAL candidates' faces dissolve into surprise as they hit the water. The video ended. The screen went black, and the three men stood bathed in harsh theatrical lighting that made them look small and exposed. The silence was suffocating. Thorne attempted to speak, his face flushed with shame and anger warring for control. "Sir, with all due respect, this was a misunderstanding. A moment of high spirits, team building. We were just—" "Silence, Lieutenant." Evans's voice cracked like a whip, sharp, final, cutting through the auditorium with the force of a physical blow. He let the word hang in the air before continuing. "You call coordinated physical assault on a senior officer team building. You believe that harassing a member of this command staff is a sign of high spirits. You are mistaken. You are a disgrace." Evans picked up a folder from the table, heavy, thick, classified markings visible even from the back rows. "I have here a summary of Chief Warrant Officer 5 Sharma's service record. Most of it is classified far above my clearance level, but I have been authorized to share certain details with you." He began to read, his voice steady and grave, each word landing like a hammer blow. 20 years of active service. Multiple deployments to designated hostile fire zones and non-permissive environments. Decorated expert in signals intelligence, cryptology, and offensive electronic warfare. Master-level qualifications in military freefall, combat diving, and advanced close-quarters combat. He paused, looked directly at Thorne. Let the silence stretch. Her decorations include the Navy Cross, awarded for actions taken during a direct action mission in the Hindu Kush. A Silver Star for gallantry during a hostage rescue operation in the Horn of Africa. 3 Bronze Stars with Valor devices. A Purple Heart. Each award listed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the assembled crowd. A palpable wave of shock rolled through the auditorium. Heads turned. Whispers started and were immediately silenced. The trainees and instructors looked from the disgraced SEALs to the quiet woman standing on stage, seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. She wasn't a technician, wasn't an observer, wasn't some desk jockey sent to evaluate equipment. She was a Tier 1 operator, a living legend, a warrior whose entire career had been spent in shadows doing work that would never be acknowledged, never be celebrated, never appear in any public record. The men who had assaulted her were trainees, boys playing dress-up, and she was the finished article, the real thing, everything they dreamed of becoming but would likely never achieve. Evans closed the folder with deliberate care. "You three did not see a chief warrant officer. You saw a woman, you saw someone quiet, and you decided she was weak. You mistook her professionalism for passivity, her restraint for inability. You were wrong." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping but somehow becoming more intense. "Your failure is not one of physicality. It is a failure of perception, of character, of judgment. And it is a failure that cannot be tolerated in the naval special warfare community. Not now, not ever." The verdict came swift and merciless. "By the authority vested in me, I find you all guilty of assault and of conduct unbecoming. Lieutenant Thorne, you are hereby reduced in rank to ensign. Petty Officer Rowlands, you are reduced to Petty Officer 2nd Class. Petty Officer Jensen to Petty Officer 3rd Class. All 3 of you are immediately removed from this training pipeline and will be reassigned to the fleet for duties commensurate with your new ranks." He let that sink in. Let them understand what he'd just done. Your careers in special operations are over. It was a death sentence. Not literal, but professional. Complete. They would spend the rest of their military careers watching from the outside as others did the work they dreamed of doing. Would carry the mark of this failure forever. Would be the cautionary tale whispered to new candidates. The example of what happens when arrogance meets consequence. As the master-at-arms moved to escort them out, Evans held up a hand. "One more thing. One final twist of the knife. You publicly disrespected a warrior. You will now publicly render the courtesy you failed to show her." Thorne's jaw worked. No sound came out. He turned slowly, mechanically, to face Sharma, his eyes filled with a toxic mix of humiliation and fury and something else, something that might have been the first glimmer of understanding. Under the burning gaze of the entire command, he brought his hand up in a salute. It was stiff, shaking with suppressed rage, but it was a salute. Rollins and Jensen, their faces ashen, followed, 3 men saluting one woman, acknowledging, however unwillingly, what she was. What she'd always been, what they'd failed to see. Sharma met Thorne's gaze, her expression unreadable. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, no sense of victory. She simply held his salute for a beat, a silent acknowledgement of the institutional process, the system working the way it was designed to work. Then she returned it. Her salute was perfect, economical, sharp, executed with the precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times in 10,000 situations. It was both an acceptance and a dismissal. The correction was complete, the lesson delivered, the standard upheld. As Thorne and his team were led out, their shoulders slumped, their futures shattered, the auditorium remained silent. But it was a different silence now. Not shock, something closer to respect, understanding, the painful recognition that their assumptions about strength and capability and worth had been fundamentally, catastrophically wrong, and that realization would stay with them, would inform how they treated others, how they evaluated their teammates, how they understood that true strength sometimes looked like quiet professionalism, that deadliest warriors weren't always the loudest, that dignity didn't need to announce itself. Later that afternoon, in the privacy of her quarters, Anna Sharma packed her single duffel bag. Her orders had come through. Her work here was done. The mission, whatever it had truly been, was complete. She folded her clothes with the same methodical precision she applied to everything, checked her gear, ensured nothing was left behind that might reveal more than she wanted revealed. There was a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find Master Chief Torres standing in the hallway. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there holding something in his hands, a small subdued unit patch from his own SEAL team, trident and eagle, the symbol of brotherhood and shared sacrifice. He held it out to her. It was a gesture that transcended words, an apology from one professional to another, an acknowledgement of failure, an offering of respect from a community that had, however briefly, failed to recognize one of their own. Sharma looked at the patch, then at the Master Chief's weathered face, the scars and lines that told stories of deployments and operations and close calls. She saw in his eyes genuine regret, genuine respect, the kind that came from understanding what excellence looked like and recognizing he'd almost missed it. She accepted the patch, held it for a moment. Then, in a rare gesture, she reached to her own uniform, removed the generic training command patch, and handed it to him. Equal exchange, recognition of shared service. A quiet understanding that transcended rank or unit or gender. They stood there for a moment, 2 warriors who'd spent their careers in the same dark places, who understood the cost of service, the weight of responsibility, the loneliness of being excellent in a world that often mistook quiet competence for weakness. Her transport was waiting on the tarmac, an unmarked C-130, gray, anonymous, its flight plan not listed on any public schedule. Captain Evans was there to see her off. The wind whipped across the concrete, cold and biting, but he stood without his cover, a sign of respect. "Chief," he said, raising his voice slightly over the whine of the engine spooling up. "On behalf of my command, I want to apologize. What happened here was a failure of leadership. My failure." Sharma paused at the foot of the ramp, turned to face him. She looked past him at the sprawling base, at the young men and women training to fight in the dark places of the world, at the buildings where future warriors were being forged. Her gaze was clear, her focus already shifting to the next horizon, the next mission, the next place where her particular skills would be needed. "The system was tested, Captain," she said, her voice even and calm, carrying easily over the noise. "It responded." She shouldered her bag, and then she added the final statement, the definitive moral of this entire affair. Correction was achieved. 4 words, simple, complete, but carrying within them a deeper truth, that institutions only have value if they can be trusted to do the right thing when tested. That respect isn't given based on appearance or gender or volume. That dignity, real dignity, doesn't demand recognition. It simply exists. And that's sometimes the strongest response to aggression isn't escalation. It's patience, documentation, faith in the process. She turned and walked up the ramp without a backward glance. The ramp closed, sealing her away. The C-130 taxied to the runway, engines roaring now, building power, and then it lifted, climbing steeply into the evening sky until it was just another aircraft. Another ghost in the darkness, heading somewhere, doing something that no one watching would ever know about or understand. On the ground, Captain Evans watched until the aircraft disappeared completely. The air in his command felt different now, cleaner somehow. The culture shifted just slightly. The lesson had been painful, necessary, and it would not be forgotten. In the barracks, the remaining candidates sat in uncomfortable silence, processing what they'd witnessed. Understanding, perhaps for the first time, that strength came in forms they hadn't been taught to recognize. That the quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous. That assumptions, especially comfortable ones, were dangerous traps waiting to be sprung. In his quarters, Master Chief Torres placed Sharma's training command patch in a shadow box alongside his own decorations. A reminder, a memorial to a lesson learned late but learned thoroughly. And somewhere, thousands of feet above the earth, Anna Sharma sat in the cargo hold of that unmarked aircraft, eyes closed, breathing steady. Already thinking about the next mission, the next challenge, the next time she'd have to prove all over again what she'd proven 1,000 times before, that excellence doesn't need permission, that strength doesn't require announcement, that dignity when tested doesn't break or bend or shout, it simply stands, waits, and acts when action is required. The mission continued, as it always had, as it always would. And the work of warriors, the real warriors who operated in shadows and silence, went on, unseen, unheralded, but absolutely essential. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.